Cool. Thank you, Claudia. Just to sort of dovetail off of Claudia's introduction, I think the word that's most associated with Claudia when I hear her name spoken is badass. So I think that's a good way to introduce. So as Claudia said, I am currently serving as the senior advisor to the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics. And in my role, sort of work to help them work through some technical issues and sort of modeling and methodological problems that they come up with. But today, in the interest of sort of now for something completely different, we're going to talk about what the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics does and where it came from, and really just some success stories that we've had over the course of the last couple of years, because we don't want to talk about the terrible flaming failures. So those of you who actually live in New York City and are in this room, I want to congratulate you, because you live in a city that cares very, very deeply about how data affects the delivery of city services to you. And they care about it so much that they actually created a law, this executive order, that created the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics and the role of a Chief Analytics Officer for the City of New York. This is sort of some high-level legal boilerplate on what the executive order does, and I'll talk more specifically about it, but it gives you a good idea of the sort of breadth of projects that we're working on. Primarily, we're there as an analytical and technical glue for city agencies working with data and hoping to improve the delivery of their services through a quantitative approach. Because of that, we're also responsible for the technical back-end and infrastructure that is used to collect and disseminate and analyze that data both within the city and then outside the city, right? And so that outside the city is the final piece where, for any of you who's ever gone onto the New York City Open Data Portal, that's run by us. We oversee that as a project. We're the quote-unquote business owner of that. And so in my role as standing here in front of you, if you've used it, have feedback, I'd love to hear it. So this is actually how things manifest from that law in day-to-day municipal operations. We have primarily 3 buckets of work that we work in, and then of course there's city agencies that fall under that. So as I said, day-to-day operations of city services. I've been here all day, so I've listened to a lot of really interesting and what I would call sexy data problems around the large-scale, real-time. I'm talking about picking up your garbage, putting out your fires, inspecting your buildings, a little bit dirtier data, so to speak. And so what we really try to do is help understand the humanity behind those bits. And what I mean by that is actually work with those agencies, understand what a Department of Building inspector sees when they go out and they fill out a form that ends up coming into our data set. So we try to apply that analytical layer on top of city services, not to tell them how to do their jobs better, but to try to seamlessly integrate into what they're doing so that we can provide a quantitative approach that just ups the ante for them, and I'll show you some examples. We've also been deeply involved in economic development projects here in the city. We're a city agency. We get our money from taxpayers, so we want lots of successful businesses in New York. We want lots of smart entrepreneurial folks to come to New York and start new businesses so that we can buy more AWS credits, right? So we work a lot with various agencies in the city that maybe you haven't heard of. You certainly heard of Department of Finance, but Economic Development Corporation, Small Business Services, these are organizations that try to help foster economic development in the city. They have lots of interesting data, and we're there to try to help them think about their problem, provide methodological and technical support. And then finally, disaster response and sustainability. The sort of history of the organization predates Superstorm Sandy, but it was really at that moment that the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics really shined as a real jewel in the hat of the city of New York. We became the centralized intelligence hub for what was going on in the city because of this, right? So this is like the big scary network graph of what goes on, but every green bubble up there is a city agency with which we have a data sharing relationship, and every yellow box is a kind of data that they have. So when it came to Hurricane Sandy, people were asking us to provide the kind of, not real-time, but the regular intelligence reporting about what was going on in the city, and it was through that effort that we really kind of sold this idea. Right? Up to that point, we had been an organization that was working on the outside, trying to find projects where we could find them within, with more forward-thinking or quantitative thinking agencies. Once Hurricane Sandy happened, a lot more people got on board. Part of that was through lots of top cover from City Hall, but part of it was just we had good results. People liked it. This is also a little bit of a data risk board, if you've ever played Risk. So this does not represent every city agency in the city, and we are continuing to try to integrate with more city agencies, bring more people into the fold so that we can do more and more interesting work. Because as many of the people in this room know, the more data you have from, say, parallel or perpendicular sources, the more interesting questions that you can ask and hopefully answer. So another big part of what we do is university outreach, right? This works for us for two big reasons. One is we are a very operationally focused organization. We want to provide, quick turnaround or efficient turnaround results to the agencies that we work with. Some of the questions that were asked would lend themselves much more nicely to an academic approach. More rigor, take more time, maybe get something published. So we have very strong relationships with NYU. As an alumnus, I'm very happy about that. For those of you that haven't heard of CUSP, which is a new NYU school, we're at NYU, so probably people have. CUSP is the Center for Urban and Science Progress. It is a new school that NYU has started, located in Metro Tech in Brooklyn, which I think the best tagline for is a university for teaching data science about cities. So as you can see, there's a nice relationship that we have with them. Cornell, of course, everybody knows Cornell Tech is here. We have a relationship with them, a strong one. Our lead programmer actually just left and is now completing her master's there. And of course, Columbia. And we're always looking for other university partners, whether it's at these universities, so people from Stern, I'd love to talk to you. Or, we'll go outside of the city. We just want to work with universities to do longer term, more rigorous analysis. And then, of course, recruiting. We want to get people in to work with us who are the smartest data scientists that want to apply their knowledge to very tangible problems here in New York City, things that you can actually move the needle on right away and see the results as you walk around the city. This is what we do to create transparency through data here in New York City. This is our democratizing analytics through open data. So the open data portal has been a big success for New York City. I would say that New York, of large urban areas, is sort of leading the way in terms of data transparency through open data. And we want to have a very strong relationship with the developer community, the data community here in New York, so that we can get great looking applications, visualizations, analyses out of the open data that we get, because we don't have final say on what's an interesting problem to solve. We want other people to think about interesting problems. We want to provide them access to the data so that they can play around with it. It's also a great way to teach yourself data science, right? If you have an interest if you're walking around New York City and you're like, man, I wish the buses would get here on time, go check it out. See if you can help us. So now on to some of the success stories. This work predates my time working with the organization, but it's probably one of the biggest success stories that if you've ever heard people from the city talk about data, you probably heard this story. So the Department of Buildings has a big problem of understanding where illegal conversions exist in the city. Illegal conversions are a huge problem both for the Department of Buildings and for the fire department, because where there are illegal conversions, there's a very, very high risk of fire and death or injury through that fire. Right? What do I mean by an illegal conversion? An illegal conversion is if you're living in an apartment or in an apartment building that has a certificate of occupancy, say for 4 apartments, and your landlord has cut it up for 12. And now there's lots and lots of people living in that building, creating a hazard. So the way that this worked before is inspectors were sort of given a non-prioritized list of buildings based on an inflow of complaint data both through 311. So someone picks up the phone and says, I think my crappy neighbor has an illegal conversion in his house. I want you to come inspect it. Or through other Department of Buildings or fire department inspectors who happen to be out in the city going about their work, seeing something they think is suspicious, and then adding it to a list. But this was a sort of last in, first out kind of situation. So there was not a smart, deliberative, quantitative way of prioritizing which buildings got inspected first. So they came to us and said, can you help us build a system that would prioritize our inspection, because ultimately this is a budget constraint on the city. They only have so many inspectors that they can send out into the field, and if most of those inspectors are going to places that aren't actually illegal conversions, then we're wasting money. So what do? We think long and hard. We go out on rides with the inspectors, understand what they're seeing in the field, try to get a sense of, all right, how would I go about building a model, knowing what I know about the city, to prioritize inspections? So these graphs show the difference in hit rates for when we were doing non-targeted inspection to targeted, right? And some of these are sort of obvious. So if you have a very, very old building, this is sort of a binary result. These are financial records. So if the building is financially in trouble, the landlord is financially in trouble, it's more likely they're going to do something illegal to try to make money. The complaint one is actually one of the more interesting ones to me because it sort of required the most thinking on our part. So if you think about, all right, if I'm living in a neighborhood where there's an illegal conversion, what are some things that I might observe as a citizen or observe on an inspection that would lead me to believe there's an illegal conversion here? Well, an illegal conversion means there's more people in an area than there should be, or that the neighborhood is meant to support. So there's going to be lots of garbage on the street, right? Because there's more humans producing waste. So we get more complaints through 311 to the Department of Sanitation. There's going to be more parking tickets, right? Because there's more cars on the street than the street is meant to support, right? So we get more information from the police department on parking tickets, and there's a whole host of things that sort of got built into this long logistic regression, right? That's basically what we're talking about. We built a long logistic regression and created a probability that what is the likelihood that this house or this apartment has an illegal conversion. And we saw a huge increase in success, right? Inspectors are now 5 times more likely to find conditions requiring a vacate. And that's a very extreme result because we very rarely actually would go into a place and find it be so bad that we have to take the people out of it to get them out of a dangerous situation. This doubly so for fire inspection. So we did a similar project with the fire department for fire inspections, and this chart is a very proud moment for MODA. Those of you who have not seen, this is a rock curve. It basically tells you what is your kind of return on investigatory investment if you're looking at some percentage of possible buildings, how many of them actually yield results. And so we got members of the fire department to look at this graph and understand that it was good, right? We're trying to raise up the quantitative literacy of people whose job is not to be quantitative. And this is not to say that the people that work in city services in New York City are extremely good at delivering the service that they're required to. The lack of injuries and death in New York City through fire is incredibly, incredibly low because the fire department does their job so well. We're trying to help them do their job better, again, because of a budget constraint. They'd only have so many inspectors to send out to do these things. So they bought into the quantitative analysis that we presented to them, and now the fire department actually has their own analytic unit, right? They've hired their own analysts, their own data scientists, in fact, I think they call themselves that, to do analytical work. That's a huge success for us, right? We think that, sort of, I guess, as any kind of good social sector-y public startup, as we sort of bootstrap ourselves in city government, if we do our job great, and every city agency builds their own analytical capability, and we don't need to do any more work, that's a huge success. And this is just a sort of map view of what that looks like. So here's the original model the fire department was using to do risk-based inspections on where fires had occurred. You notice that there's this huge gap in terms of where fires are actually happening on the updated model. All right, and then the updated model is actually able to predict many more of those fires that are happening in the far Rockaway. So there's just a sort of, everybody loves a map. That's what it looks like on a map. Same thing can go for economic development. Now we'll have a similar looking map with a different theme, right? So we want to be able to predict where businesses are growing in New York City, and the business map provided by a kind of third-party data aggregator gave us this, and apparently they had felt there was some sort of apocalypse that was happening in Brooklyn, but we knew that that wasn't the case. There was a lot of activity happening in Brooklyn, and we were able to turn it around just using internal city data. And at the end, I'm going to show you a product now that we've built sort of based on this finding to help citizens. Another thing that we're getting into is trying to be more informative of city council and legislative activities. So when there is an interest in putting forth a legislative proposal, city council can come to us and say, hey, tell us what the numbers are on this. Would this be effective if we actually did something? So one example of that is assessing the environmental impact of compost requirement for restaurants. So we've done some analysis to show that you have to be very selective in terms of where you would put a policy like that for restaurants. Another one, which gets back to the disaster response, is in the event of a major power outage in the city, like we saw with Sandy, where could we put this microgrid technology, this sort of portable power supplies in the city to get maximum impact on at-risk areas? So here we are. We found this information about where economic activity was happening in the city, and the question became, well, how can we actually help New Yorkers who may be interested in starting a business learn about where or what kind of business they should start based on what we know? So the story that I like to tell is, let's imagine you live in Brooklyn. I live in Brooklyn. Let's imagine you live in Brooklyn and you're interested in starting a coffee shop. Well, if you want to start your own independent coffee shop and you're competing with a large brand like Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, those franchisees can rely on market research provided to them by a large corporation. But the independent entrepreneur doesn't have those resources. If that independent entrepreneur is somewhat technically sophisticated, they might say, all right, well, I'm going to go to Google, and I'm going to go to Google Maps, and I'm going to say coffee shops in my zip code. We get a map with a bunch of orange dots on it. Those orange dots will tell you where coffee shops are based on the latest Google data. Interesting, might tell you where there's a need in terms of a corner or a location. But then you want to know other things like, I don't know, is it actually safe in this neighborhood? What's the cost of commercial real estate in this neighborhood? So if you're slightly more sophisticated, you might go to a tool like Trulia or Zillow and look at their data maps that show highly aggregated crime statistics about New York or cost of economic development in New York. We, as MODA and the City of New York, know a ton about what's happening in New York City. We just hadn't thought to put it on a map and give it back to people yet. So what we did with what we call the Business Atlas, which you can go to, it's live online right now, is to say, how can we provide a tool that's going to support that entrepreneur to help them make a better decision? So we pulled together information about the demographics of an area. So where are people, what is the sort of emigration out of zip codes and areas in New York City? So we get a heat map to show you, where are all the 25-year-olds moving to in Brooklyn? Where are all the younger folks moving to, on the Upper East Side, older folks, whatever? We can tell you that. We also have really, really granular data about crime, and not just violent crime, things that get aggregated at the national level, but also quality of life stuff that comes in over 311, right? If you're opening a coffee shop, yes, of course you want to know if there's danger of people being robbed when they walk to your shop, but you also want to know, are there a lot of noise complaints? Would someone actually want to sit outside and drink a cup of coffee on this block? We can tell you that. And so I encourage folks to go to this. This just got released maybe about a month ago, and so it's sort of a live beta test. So, break it, tell us what sucks. We want to hear about it. Quickly, this is another externally facing report for transparency, talking about where Sandy spending is going, right? So, sorry for those of you that live in New Jersey, but if you live in New York City, we have transparency around where our Sandy data is going. And again, this is a sort of culmination of lots of data in the city and producing a product that faces externally. And one really hard problem that I won't have any time to talk about is modeling 911 response and creating transparency about the delivery of emergency services in New York City. The anatomy of a 911 call is actually much more complicated than you might think, particularly around how data gets collected. So we've been working for a long time on trying to understand how to model the end-to-end response time. The moment you pick up the phone to the moment that service is delivered, the information and data gets bounced around a lot inside the city. It becomes a massively hierarchical problem. So the analysts have put together, they've done lots of work. This is also available online, right up there. Unfortunately, it's, this is government work. The website doesn't work in Chrome. I don't know why. But you can browse it in Firefox and Internet Explorer if you want to. But it's actually a tremendously valuable piece of information. If you think about it, the transparency of 911 data, if a citizen can go and look to see how long it takes a police officer to come to their block and they don't like it, they can then go to their city council member and ask them to change it. And that's a really big deal for municipal government. So thank you very much.
Thank you.